Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is your presenter, Dr. Joseph Tomungalude Baba Sr., Executive Director and founder of Dignity Artists Theater Incorporated. Episode 12, Analyzing Liberia's Conflict Based on Historical and Cultural Eras. Today, we want to analyze Liberia's conflict from the historical and cultural perspectives. Therefore, to begin, we must first admit that the current conflict or crisis in Liberia did not begin today, yesterday, or the day before yesterday. Instead, it began when God created human beings on earth. However, to better understand what I mean, we must first understand the definition of the word conflict. In this discussion, conflict means misunderstanding, disagreement, hala, yo-yo, confusion, blather, fuss. Also, we must understand that no two persons are alike or agree on everything. So where two or three or more people are gathered or when they interact, there must be some misunderstanding. That misunderstanding may escalate to violence if the persons who misunderstand each other do not come to a common ground or understanding. Hence, this program is about actively engaging all Liberians to understand that conflict or disagreement is a natural phenomenon. It happens every day. It is unavoidable, but we can contain conflict if we learn what caused the conflict so that we may avoid the recurrence of the action that caused that conflict. With respect to the DATI Civic and Peace Education Audiovisual series, we are addressing a national conflict that has reached a level which seems to be beyond our ability to peacefully resolve. Thus, we have come to a standstill and we now have a stalled peace process that does not go hither nor thither, the old folks say. But I have a suggestion or recommendation to offer the Liberian people regarding how we can peacefully and effectively find out the root causes of the Liberian conflict and how we can work together to solve it. So I want you to please listen very keenly to me as I share my recommendations with you as a Liberian playwright, scholar, and cultural researcher. What I'm about to share with you is based on cultural and historical research. And it is also based on my 48-year experience as a scholar artist in the Liberian society. So please listen very carefully. Usually when looking at root causes of conflict, it is also very important to consider the socio-cultural and historical background of issues that led to that conflict. In this light, I would like us to analyze Liberia's conflict based on historical and cultural eras through which Liberia's national conflict developed over the ages. So when we talk about eras, E-R-A-S, we mean chunk of years, like a century or like 45 years, 50 years. So for instance, since the military coup took place in Liberia, a new era began, and that new era, extended all the way to the time when we had the civil conflict, the civil war, the genocide, and this genocide period now is a new era because a lot of things happened within those years, within those decades. A lot of things happened. Historical and cultural changes took place. people's lives changed, like from 1980 to 1989, when the war took place. You see that traditional indigenous Liberians took over the realm of the country. They took over the power of the country. Uh, um, and that changed the history, it changed the culture, it changed the belief of the people regarding, the governance of the country, regarding the economic status of the people. And you see that ordinary Liberian people, indigenous people now are millionaires. They have a lot of money and properties and power. That's quite different from what happened, what obtained before 1980. And then after the Civil War, which is not over, because there are a lot of other things going on, genocide, that things going on in the country. But again, you see that there's a change in the behavior, the culture, the history of the country. People are doing things differently, they're thinking differently. So when we talk about eras, that's what we're talking about. So if we want to really analyze the Liberian conflict, we have to divide it into different eras and analyze what took place during that time, that period of history of the people. So basically, that's what we're talking about here. So we're saying that the Liberian peace process right now is stalled. It's stalled, meaning that we have not really come to a conclusion. The conflict has not ended. Those who were responsible for the escalation of the Liberian conflict are still in, key positions of public trust, and they are impeding the successful resolution of the conflict. So the conflict is not over, but we need to analyze it so that we will focus on those things that caused the conflict, and eventually we can find some solutions to them. So this is where we are with respect to episode 12, analyzing Liberia's conflict based on historical and cultural eras. So in this discussion today, I will be highlighting some of the events that took place in our history as a people, as a nation and people. Usually, when looking at root causes of conflict, it is also very important to consider the socio-cultural and historical backgrounds of issues that led to that conflict. In this light, I would like us to analyze Liberia's conflicts based on historical and cultural eras through which Liberia's national conflict developed over the ages. For you will agree with me, our conflict did not start today, but rather it started from the time God first made our ancestors. Also, you will recall in an earlier definition of conflict, I stated that where two or more persons are gathered, there is bound to be conflict because of individual differences. So that's the first thing that I want you to understand with respect to the Liberian conflict. The Liberian conflict, if we want to address it, we must address it from the point of view and recognition of the fact that there are individual differences. And it's those individual differences that are kind of impeding the successful implementation of the Liberian peace process, because each Liberian has its own unique idea regarding what caused the conflict and who's responsible and who's not responsible. And that's where we are with that. So this particular lecture is to give some kind of direction to everyone, irrespective of the individual differences, but we're talking about national interest. So when it comes to national interest, the national interest comes first above individual interests. Therefore, it is safe to trace the root of our national conflict way back to the beginning of time when our ancestors first met and lived together. So when we're talking about ancestors now, we're going to be talking about indigenous Africans, indigenous Liberian people, and all of that. And that includes even those who later on were sold as slaves and came back as Congo people. All those people, Congo, American Liberians, and Creoles, and all those people, they were once a stock of the indigenous sect of the Liberian, culture. So we will come to that so that you understand that we are all one people. We come from one root. Therefore, it is safe to trace the root of our national conflict way back to the beginning of time when our ancestors first met and lived together. Hence, to do this, we must first define who Liberians are to better understand why and how they got into conflict with one another in the very first place. My reason for saying this is because Liberians are the ones who started the war. Therefore, Liberians should be the ones to end the Liberian Civil War whenever they decide to do so. So you can see that even with all of the atrocities that took place, foreign governments and international humanitarian organizations came to our rescue. But in the end, you saw that the UN packed up and they left. And they left us here. ECOMOG went, and here we are. That's to tell you that if you have a problem, you have a conflict, it's important for you to know how to resolve your own conflict in-house and stop taking all of your washing your dirty clothes in the streets and in the market. That's what Liberians are doing. That's why this conflict is going on and on. Now, let's go to the historical aspect of how, who we are. So the first thing you need to know is when you're dealing with conflict, you need to know who's involved in the conflict. Who are the people that are involved in the conflict? Are they Nigerians? Are they Guineans? Are they Ivorians? Or are they Liberians? If they are Liberians, then what are the ethnic groups that constitute the citizenry of Liberia? So the first thing we need to understand the people, because we talked about individual differences and all of that. And the different ethnic groups have differences, the different way of thinking, different beliefs and customs. Some may be similar, some may not be similar. So first of all, we need to find out who are the people who are involved in this conflict. Because as we said, where 2 or 3 or more people are gathered, there will always be some kind of a misunderstanding. So our national misunderstanding that we have, how can we resolve it with respect to the people who are involved in the conflict? So you want to define who Liberians are. If we'll talk about who are Liberians, then the first thing we want to do is to according to our history and culture, Liberians may be divided into 4 major linguistic groups. Now, I told you before about the importance of language. That language forms a very important aspect of our identity as a people. When you say who is Boyka, you say Boyka, you hear the name Boyka, but who is Joseph Boyka? And the next thing, if you want to really know where he falls in the Liberian, linguistic grouping, then you may say, well, he's Mende, and if he's Mende, then what linguistic group is that? The Mende fall within the Mande linguistic group. So now you know where to place Boyka. If you're talking about Cummings, they say where he's a Liberian, but he's a Liberian from where he's from, southeastern Liberia, and he falls within the group, the Kwa linguistic group, because he affiliates with the Grebo people. So you know exactly where it comes from. So all of us, if you follow this structure of analyzation, you will find out that we all fit into one of the 4 groups that I'm going to be talking about here. And I said 4 major linguistic groups, and I said the Kwa linguistic group. There will be the Kran, the Kru, the Grebo, the Bassa, the Dewian, the We, the Bele people. Then the second one would be the Mande speaking group, M-A-N-D-E, Mande speaking group. That would be the Pele, the Bandi, the Lama, the Kisi, the Vai, the Mende, M-E-N-D-E, that's the ethnic group. But then the M-E-N-D-E is the linguistic group, the cover, the group under which all these other, Mende speaking groups fall. Pele, Bandi, Loma, Kisi, Vai, Mende, Dan, Ma, Mandingo. They fall within that group. Then the male, we got the Gola. And sometimes they put the Day people there, but the Day people are actually, part of the Kwa. Then we have the settler sets, those who are settlers. Now, it's important for me to clarify here that if it depends on the era that we're talking about, the era of Liberian history we're talking about. Like for instance, we're talking the prehistoric era, then at that time, those that we now consider to be settlers, like American Liberians or Congos or Creoles, would not be in that group because during that time we were all one people. So at that time, a prehistoric period, they will not be that, but because we're talking about present day Liberians who constitute the different groups, then we would say the settlers, and we'll say American Liberians, Congos, and Creoles. And the other settlers would include naturalized Liberians, those who come from different African countries, Black nations around the world, from the islands and all of that. They will be naturalized Liberians, or people, and their children though would be Liberians, but who turn 18 and declare themselves as Liberian citizens, but also they will fall within the settler group because they don't fall within those different ethnic groups that I talked about earlier, and that will include the Fula, the how you call them, different people, the Yorubas, the Igbos, all those would be Ghanaians, Fanti, Ashanti, all those people that come from different African nations that naturalized, as Liberian citizens will fall within the settler and immigrant, section. Now, these various ethnic and linguistic groups have unique histories and cultures that stand out, that make them stand out both as Africans and Liberians, and their cultures and histories collectively play a major part in the determination of the Liberian identity, and in terms of how we may view their traditional interrelationships and involvement in the current Liberian political and socioeconomic crisis and matrix. Now, so this is also important because now if you talk with the Kwa people, you'll find out, first of all, that they're from eastern, southeastern, south central Liberia. They come from that side of the country. And not just only that, but their language that they speak, their languages are very similar. They're like, different variations. They're like dialects of different things. So the Kra speaking, the Kru people can understand some of what the Kra people are saying. The Kra people can understand what the Kru are saying. The Grebo people can understand what Kra people are saying. Kra people can understand what Grebo people are saying. The Bassa people, the Dewian people, the We, all these people, the only people in that Kwa group that speak a little differently, from the Bassa, the Kru, the Grebo, and the Kra are the Belet, because they kind of traveled all the way to the western side, so they're closer to the Lomas and the Bandis and the Vai and all those people on that side, in the Mande region of the country. But you can see that there are a lot of similarities among the Kwa speaking people, the they love palm butter, they eat rice, cassava, their belief systems, Judo, Judaism, they have characteristics of those kinds of beliefs and practices and all of that. So they have a lot of similarities. So that's why they're grouped together as one, cluster of languages, and not just only the language, but the belief systems and the way how they react to people, the way how they react to conflict, the way how they address conflict, and all of that. We have a lot of similarities, with respect to that. It's the same thing with the Mande speaking people, the Bandi, the Pele, the interesting thing about the Kwa people is that they're a family. They are blood related. Mainly with the Mande people, they may be blood related, but it's through intermarriage. Through intermarriage, they got related. So one of the they're like uncle, one ethnic group is uncle to the other one, like the Lama and the five people, and Kisi and Bandi, they have their interrelationships and all of their connections. And that is very important, because in that process, we're able to solve, a lot of conflicts that may occur. So we're saying that they have the unique cultures and characteristics that determine their identity. So they're also through that the language, the Kwa people speak, the way how they behave, we can identify them. We kind of have an impression of who they are, what they like, what they usually do, the characteristics of their behavior, all of that. And it's the same thing with the Mande speaking people. And of course, it's the same thing with the settlers, the American Liberians and the Congos and the Creoles. They have their similar experience with respect to being in slavery and being liberated and returning to Africa to make Africa their home, returning to their father's land, to start life all over. So they have that kind of similar, experience and historical traits as well. They speak English, which is a foreign language, and they lived in the Western world, so they have a Western orientation. So that in itself also is something that when we are talking about the resolution of the Liberian conflict, that we want to take into consideration. Also, most ethnic groups of Liberia are interrelated through blood relationship or by marriage and through traditional cultural institutions. So sometimes they are linked, together through cultural institutions, like for instance, the Poro and the Sande. Mainly you'll find that among the Mel and the Mande speaking people, they have the Poro and the Sande, the Niji, the Bo, the Kui, the River Bush and Blonyo would be like the Kwa speaking people, they do that. And the American Liberians and Congos would do the basing and UBF and those kinds of things, secret societies and stuff and all of that. So that also is important for us to know those things, because through those institutions, we can also, pursue, the resolution of our conflicts. Like for instance, back in the day, if there were any kind of conflict among the Mande speaking people, the Poro society would be heavily involved in the resolution of that conflict. And so on the Kwa side also, like among the Crown people, if they had a real big situation that could not be handled, by the chiefs and all of that, the Kui, society would intervene. So these institutions, are not just there for being their sake. They have important functions that for over centuries, have been very useful in keeping the society stabilized. Okay, another reason why it might be safe to use culture and history to trace our national conflict is because traditional Liberians cherish their cultural and historical roots. That's why most of the time you see people say, oh, the indigenous Liberians are tribalistic. You see the tribalistic, yes, the description is true, but that tribalism thing that you see is because of their connection, or to their history and culture. And so it's easier for them to identify with people who speak the same language they speak, that share the same beliefs that they share, and they feel more comfortable that way, because what happened in the Liberian matrix, the Liberian society after we formed a union to establish the Republic of Liberia, is that people from different races, different ethnic groups were put together to form a nation, and putting people of different ethnic groups, different beliefs together to form a nation created a challenge. As I said before, even when two persons, come together, they don't always agree on the same thing, let alone having so many ethnic groups with different beliefs and cultures coming together to form the Republic of Liberia. So the first thing we need to understand with respect to resolving the Liberian conflict is to know who are the Liberians, who's involved in this conflict. And so then that we know that who are involved, the different ethnic groups. Then we'll also want to understand, what does the word Liberia mean? What does it mean to be a Liberian? In the previous episode, we defined Liberia as a land of the free. So all of these ethnic groups put together, they're all supposed to be free people. They're supposed to enjoy liberty. They're supposed to enjoy justice, equal justice and liberty. But is that what's happening? No, that's not what's happening. So this may be one of the reasons we have the conflict, because there are other people who are enjoying and other people are suffering. So that does not meet the definition of the word Liberia. So then you can see why there's a conflict. So there's a conflict because there's disagreement with respect to the distribution of national wealth. There's an imbalance in the appropriation of political positions in government to the different ethnic groups, so we don't have an inclusive type of government and all of that. So these are some of the things that are creating the conflict. People are dissatisfied because certain ethnic groups are not represented in the government. They don't have the power, they don't have access to national power or the voice to express themselves and all of that. So you look at the Liberian conflict. First of all, you want to know who are the people involved in the conflict, the different ethnic groups, the different people. And then you also want to find out, what does the word Liberia mean? Are we truly living the definition of our name? No, we're not, because there are some different disagreements because of disadvantages that are taking place and all of that. So if we can understand that, that's part of a way forward to addressing the Liberian conflict, so that we will arrive at a peaceful resolution in time to come. But it also means that you must listen. You cannot, don't let me just waste my time, trying to explain some technical details to you. And you say, man, to help with that man. You always like to talk too much boasting or this and that. This is not boasting. This is the actual way for us to resolve the conflict. The actual way for us to resolve the conflict is to recognize the people who constitute the citizenry of Liberia, and then also to be inclusive in what we do. That's very important. Another reason why it might be safe to use culture and history to trace our national conflict is because traditional Liberians cherish their cultural and historical roots, and we talked about that. From this point of view, it is very critical to divide Liberian history and culture into two segments to better understand the dynamics of our socioeconomic and political conflicts. So I'm moving forward now to where we want to look at the conflict in our history and culture, from the historical perspective. So one of the ways to do that is that first we have the prehistoric Liberia. I want you to understand that the Liberian history and culture can be divided into one, prehistoric Liberia, that is purely African in its culture and history, and two, historic Liberia, that comprises a period of cultural conflicts and cultural syncretism. Cultural syncretism, SYNCRETISM. Syncretism just means that a blend of culture. For instance, where today we have indigenous Liberians and American Liberians who are westernized. We have Liberians who are westernized. They speak English, they dress, they wear cool suits, they go to church, they do things that people do in the West. And even though they may have indigenous background, but yet they practice Western culture. So that's what we mean by cultural syncretism. That means that person is combining African beliefs and cultural norms with Western beliefs and cultural norms. But when we talk about prehistoric Liberia or pure traditional Liberian society, we mean the period of Liberian history and culture for which we do not have any written accounts. We don't have any written accounts of the prehistoric period when our ancestors came from the east and they landed, to what is now called Liberia. That period of time, we don't have any kind of written recording of it. The only thing that we have of it is oral tradition, the stories that were handed down to us by our ancestors and all of that. And hopefully, if we can write them down, that would be very important. But notwithstanding, it is safe to state that the Vais and maybe other Liberian ethnic groups might have probably had some sort of written scripts through which traditional Liberians recorded historical and social events at some point in time during the traditional era. Moreover, it is likely that some of our ancient writings might have been destroyed by other barbaric peoples over the course of time during periods of war or conflicts. So sometimes, like for instance, the great libraries of Alexandria that were destroyed by the Romans, during, the conquest, when they wanted to overcome, the Egyptians, and also to destroy the Egyptian civilization and other well-known African civilizations. They came across all of these things, writings and artifacts that they destroyed. So some of those things might have happened to us as well, because in some places in Liberia, some caves and things like in bombing, there are, I think certain caves there where people see some inscriptions, on the walls of the caves, but we don't know what those inscriptions mean, what they're saying, what language it's in, and so forth. All those kinds of things require research and archaeology, archaeological, research, to find out what those things are, what they meant those days, and all of that. Unfortunately, we're not a people who believe in research and all of that. So a lot of our history and culture is becoming extinct because you don't have that many people like myself who's interested in in recording, our history and culture, like the way the late Patty Moore did, my mentor. Also, it is true that certain aspects of Liberian history and its cultural development disappeared over time because those who knew about them did not successfully pass the information on to succeeding generations. And this is happening right now as we speak in Liberia, because during the war and things, people destroy a lot of things in the country. They destroy a lot of things in the country. And so unfortunately, if we don't, pick up the little pieces that we have left, in time to come, like 20 more years from now, it's going to just be zero, because a lot of old people died during the genocide. And in our culture, since we don't have a lot of written information, most of our valuable history, historical accounts were stored in the minds of our elders. And these people, well, a lot of them have died, and the few that are left, if we are wise enough, we will, approach them and ask them questions and write down some things, so that at least we can have something to hold on to, etc. So when I speak of the prehistoric period or pure traditional Liberian society, it includes the period of our national history from the BC, before Christ era, to the period before 1822 AD. So the prehistoric period, we're talking about that period from the beginning of creation, before Christ, to 1822. That would be the prehistoric period, because from 1822 upward, at least we got some written accounts, because those who came, the settlers who came, they had Western education. They were able to record a lot of things. So that prehistoric era is an era where we need to do a lot of research on to find exactly what took place. But that same prehistoric period also includes the American Liberians and the Congos and any other Black people that were taken as slaves to the Western world and that came back. So that's very important. So you want to look at it first. Also, if we're talking about the prehistoric period, or that time before 1822, then those who came in 1822 are also descendants of the people of Africans and Liberians of prehistoric period. So that's something for us to understand now, as we're coming to this, as we're coming to address the resolution of our conflict. We want to not look at people who were settlers, or descendants of settlers that came, as people who are completely different from us, from the indigenous Liberians, but that they also have the same blood that we got, and that they just came back, from a situation where their ancestors were taken away from Liberia to the Western world, and fortunately they were able to come back. Now you can put yourself, those of us who are indigenous Liberian citizens who left Liberia during the Liberian genocide and came to America and became citizens here, and that's why you see history is repeating itself. So people in Liberia are now looking at Liberians who live here as outsiders, So it's the same thing that we've done to the American Liberians and the Congos, by looking at them as outsiders, instead of realizing that they were once part of us. Their ancestors were part of our ancestors, but unfortunately they were sold as slaves and they came back. So there's no reason actually for us to continue with that unnecessary argument about Congo and country and all of that, because we're all one people who have the same blood. Well, you understand that now if we talk about prehistoric period, where we all started as one people, but then later on, and this is a period when we did not have any kind of contact with the Western world. We're just purely in our African setting. Nobody had been taken as slave to anywhere, any place whatsoever. So we were just one people. So that's the prehistoric period. Now, the prehistoric period, the pure traditional society dates back to the time of creation and the peopling of the world. It includes the migration and settlement of traditional Liberian ethnic groups in Liberia prior to the coming of the settlers from the United States of America. And so, as I said, they were once part of us. So, and that was prior to the slave trade too, that we're talking about now. So the traditional period, we were all here. We were all in Liberia. Hence, the inter-ethnic relationships that subsist among Liberians today did not only begin in Liberia when traditional Liberians arrived on Liberian soil, but rather circumstances, events that brought traditional Liberian ethnic groups into contact with one another started from the beginning of time before early Liberians migrated to what is present-day Liberia. Therefore, traditional Liberians hold their long-established inter-ethnic relationship very sacred, and they demand that their inter-ethnic affairs or dealings must be revered and maintained as such. So then it goes on to talk about the similar linguistic and cultural patterns, as well as similar traditional cultural beliefs and foods, like the Kwas, as I was saying before, like the Mande-speaking people, or like the Congo people, with the gravy and smoked feed gravy and breadfruit, dombo, and all those different things are part of the cultural traits and all of that of the different people they share together. So traditional Liberian ethnic groups share traditional systems of worship, some of which are Afro-Judaic in practice, like Judaism, Judaism and Christianity. Judaism existed, among most of the ethnic groups of Liberia, especially the Kwa-speaking people, or prior to the introduction of Christianity. And in that respect, the natives believe in worshiping a one true living God, not many gods, but one true living God. And they also worship their ancestral spirits in order to appease the dead. So the reason why I'm emphasizing this with respect to the one true living God thing is that, for instance, in the Crown language, there's no plural for the word God. There's no plural for the word God, which corroborates, which proves that the people didn't believe in so many gods. They believe in one God. They say Nyoswa. They don't say Nyoswi. But they also believe in the ancestral spirits. They believe in life after death and all of that. And these are some of the characteristics that were borrowed from Judaism into Christianity, with Christ dying and rising and all of that. And our people didn't know anything about Christ, just like the Jewish people, of the world, especially the African Jews and all of that. They did not know anything about Christ. They only knew about God, the Creator, and all of that, etc. And they also share or they have other things in common, such as the monarchical system of governance. So their religious beliefs, the traditional indigenous Liberians, native Liberians, the religious beliefs were common among all the different ethnic groups. And then they also had the same system of governance, because, from the beginning of our African history and culture, we've had kings, the pharaohs, the emperors, in Ethiopia, XII, and all these different ancient, countries, Songhai, Mali, Ghana, they all had, kings and all that. So our governance system was monarchical. It was the monarchical governance system. And sometimes they had council of elders, and sometimes a confederacy. Now that confederacy thing, in the Liberian history and culture, it was very, very prevalent in the southeastern portion of Liberia with the Quas. The Quas people formed a confederacy where the Crown, the Crew, the Grebo, the Bassa people were always, tight. They were very tight. So if any other ethnic group attacked, the Crown people, the Grebo, the Crew, the Bassa people will come to the rescue and vice versa. So they formed a confederacy where they were independent, kingdoms, but yet because of their blood relationship and all of that, if you attack one of them, it meant that you attack all of them. So they had a confederacy thing. That also existed among the Mandate speaking people as well. So you can see that the indigenous people had, though they spoke different languages and all of that, but they had a lot of things in common with respect to the government, the worship system, and then also the educational system, traditional educational system. The Mandate speaking people mainly had the Poro and Sandy. The Kwa people had a Niji, the Kui, the Bo, and all of that. Where they were institutions through which they passed on knowledge and information from one set of people to the other. So those institutions must be preserved, and they're very important in the resolution of our conflicts, because certain things that cannot be discussed openly, they can go through the secret society, to talk about some of those things. Then the educational system was kind of culturally relevant. Traditional Liberians learned to become self-sufficient in terms of producing their own foods, clothing, housing, roads, medical and healing institutions, as well as engaging in various forms of socialization and athletics. As a result, traditional Liberian ethnic groups were well informed about themselves and their closed settings. Also, due to culturally relevant education, traditional Liberians developed self-knowledge, and they as well developed self-pride. In this manner, traditional Liberians cherish their historical and cultural backgrounds as well. So that's why you see that most of the time, when you see that thing where you say, oh, they're tribalistic and all of that, that's because, of the type of education that they had. It was centered on them. It was centered on their history and their culture. They knew where they came from and what it stood for, etc. Traditional Liberians formed alliances that were centered on similar linguistic and cultural patterns, as well as governance structures that were suitable for their existence as a people based on their concepts of self-knowledge and self-pride. In view of the foregoing, traditional Liberians were already set in their time-honored history and culture before the coming of the settlers in the early 1800s. So I'm sharing all these things with you with prehistoric Liberia and all of that, so that you will know that these people were already set. They had a system of worship. They had a system of governance. They had a system of education. They were well established as a civilized people. They were organized. So they were not on, quote unquote, uncivilized as they were later described when we come to the next era, with the coming of the settlers and all of that. And they spoke their indigenous languages that were very, very, useful for them in terms of communication. So even though the Crown people spoke their Crown, but they couldn't understand Bele, but yet, the traditional traits and beliefs were kind of similar. So even though communication-wise, they did not understand one another, but in terms of the life they lived, the culture and the beliefs, those norms and values were very, very similar. or across, various ethnic groups and all of that. And then prehistoric Liberia or pure traditional Liberian society, we just talked about that. And we said, the period of Liberian history and culture for which we do not have any written account, etc. And then we come to the historic phase of Liberian culture. The historic phase of Liberian culture is where we have a lot more issues than we did with the prehistoric era, where the people were just traditionally African, where their cultures and their belief systems were very similar and relevant to their immediate environment. But that changed, during the historic phase of a Liberian culture. The historic phase of Liberian culture deals with the time when we formally began to write down historical and cultural accounts of events that occurred in Liberia, such as recording the coming of the settlers or the date of the Declaration of Independence, July 26, 1847. In this light, the historic phase of Liberian culture is divided into two important segments. That's why I want you to understand that the historic phase of Liberia. That historic phase of Liberia will also include Dualu Bokoli, the VI, genius who invented the VI script, and other Liberian scholars who invented some sort of script, to record whatever piece of history they were able to write, to record, all that will be in part of the historic phase of Liberian culture. But then we'll talk about the historic phase of Liberian culture. We want to talk about the period of cultural conflict. The period of cultural conflict. Don't forget, we're talking about the Liberian conflict. And here now, we've reached a stage now where we want to really talk about what the conflict was all about. How did this conflict start? So this conflict, not that during the pure traditional society there weren't conflicts, there were inter-ethnic wars and whatnot, conflicts, all over the place. But those conflicts were sometimes based on, somebody took my wife, do this and that. All those kinds of things, they were not based on ideological differences. In the historic phase of Liberian culture, we're going to see a different dimension of conflict. And this different dimension of conflict is highly psychological in that new ideas, very, very strange ideas now were introduced to Africans who had lived, a culture and history of more than, I don't know how many millennia. Now they're going to be introduced to something that is so completely strange, and there are different aspects of that conflict that we will talk about individually, hopefully in the next edition, episode 13. That historic phase, has two segments. First, it has the period of cultural conflict, which I would say from 1822 to 1950. Actually, you would say that the cultural conflict started long before that time, when our African ancestors began to interact with European explorers. But those explorers just came and went. They were traders. They would come, sell some goods and go do that. Then eventually that led to the slave trade. And then some of our people now who came back, were taken as slaves, across the Atlantic. But when they came back to settle, they were completely different because they have been over 200 some more years. They lived in the Western world. So now they're coming back to Liberia. They're coming back as the same Black people, same relatives of ours that were taken there. They've got the same blood and all of that, but their mindset was completely different. The language they spoke was different. The clothes they wore were different. Their belief system was different. The educational system was different. The governance system was different. You know, everything different, different, different. So that's the beginning of this real Liberian conflict that we're going to talk about. We're kind of running out of time, so I won't go into details now. I would leave this for episode 13. We'll start with the historic phase of Liberian culture. And during that historic phase, I will analyze what the problems are regarding the Liberian conflict and how can we resolve those problems. Those problems, they are technical problems, in that sequence type of thing that you guys are doing up and down in Liberia. They're, causing confusion and, making part of noise, that's not it. The real issue has not been addressed. And until these issues are addressed, you'll just be like wasting water on dog's back. That's why you see the conflict just keeps going on and on, because people are not really addressing the issue, and also because people don't know what these issues are that I'm sharing with you. You need to know them, and those who are educated need to be sober-minded enough for us to concentrate on how to address these various issues, so that eventually we can ease the tension and the conflict in the country, for us to move forward to develop our country. I want to say thank you very much for your keen attention and support. And I look forward to discussing with you next week on the historic phase of Liberian culture. And during that time, we will discuss the period of cultural conflict. And the period of cultural conflict has a lot of discussions and subheadings that we will discuss next week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. We want to thank all those who donate to this program to enable us to air it, so that we can share more ideas with you and the international community, and to those who are our international partners, so that together we can address, the critical issues, underlying issues and factors that are responsible for the Liberian conflict. I want to say thank you once again. Thanks to all the DATI peace advocates in Kepamas, the Benadru chapter, Meshach Elliott and his team. And we also want to thank the DATI peace advocates in Montserrat County with Henry Fayatamba and his team, for your support and for your voluntary services to your nation and people. May God richly bless all of you. And for those who are, relaying our broadcast in Liberia, want to say thank you to Daniel Boyle for Radio Advent 93.7. Want to say thank you to Brian Dior of Phoenix Radio 102.7 in Harper. And want to say thank you to Father Tasia of Radio Paraclete FM 93.7 in Banga. Thanks also to His Lordship Bishop Tony Boa for his support, and Bishop Conley, Andrew Conley of the Farmers Diocese for his support as well. And peace be to the ashes of the late Archbishop Ziegler, who also approved, our request for us to collaborate with the Catholic Church. We want to say may his soul rest in peace. And thank you all for listening. This has been your presenter, Dr. Joseph Tomogalote Baba Sr., Executive Director of Deputy Artist Theater, saying goodbye for now. and thanks for your support.